Please welcome Sam Sifton, Mario Batali, Tom Colicchio, Andrea Reusing.
Sorry,
They throwing stuff, Tom?
I'm a Virgo.
I like that music.
Wow, powerful.
That's something. Come on in. Take a seat. Join us. Welcome. Good afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit today about what role chefs play or what role chefs can play in the creation of a sustainable agriculture system in the United States, and I suppose in the creation of a healthy diet for all of us. But I'll start by introducing our panelists, since they're not terribly well known. Here is Andrea Reusing of the Restaurant Lantern in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She is, as you all know, an award-winning chef and cookbook author, very active in the campaign to change our nation's food policies. She sits on the board of the Center for Environmental Farming Systems at North Carolina State, as well as on the boards of the Chefs Action Network and Chefs Collaborative. Gov. Bev Perdue, I love saying Gov. Bev Perdue, put her on the North Carolina Sustainable Local Food Advisory Council. Tommy Colicchio, you know him as a chef and as a restaurateur, a cookbook author, and as the scary head judge on Top Chef. But politicians know him increasingly as a founder and board member of Food Policy Action, a political action committee with a simple goal: to hold politicians accountable for their voting on issues relating to food and farming. And Mario Batali, 26 restaurants to his name, a couple grocery stores, shelf of cookbooks, a lot of television shows, and an abiding interest in food policy that is a highlight of his new and excellent cookbook, America Farm to Table. So, Tom, let's start with you. I hate to bring up a competitor at the New York Times Food for Tomorrow conference, but in the Wall Street Journal the other day, there was an op-ed telling you basically to stick to your pots and pans and stay out of politics. Mm-hmm. To be truly useful, a food movement, and it is presumed that you advocate for a food movement, shouldn't be about politics, wrote Julie Kelly. It should be about food, what to cook and how to cook it without breaking the family budget. What on earth are you doing in politics, Tom Colicchio?
Sometimes I don't know. I got there because after while my wife was making the film A Place at the Table, it was clear to us that, including everything that Mark said in his amazing opening statement, including everything that he said, and he talked about poverty, what he didn't mention, he touched on it a little bit, was that we don't have political will in this country to fix hunger. And it became very obvious to us as we were going around and talking to various people and making the film. And so that put me front and center after the film came out. In fact, during the film, I testified during the childhood nutrition reauthorization in front of George Miller's committee. And that kind of opened the door for me. And I found that we can sort of be part of this food movement, and we could sort of come up from the grassroots, and I think that's great. But at some point, we need to turn this social movement into a political movement. It's what happened in various other social movements as well, whether it was civil rights or whether it was marriage equality. At some point, we need to address the politics of this, or the policies, the underlying policies. In Michael Moss's piece, he talked about broccoli when he was up here earlier, and he talked about broccoli. They want to figure out ways to lower the price of broccoli, and they want to go out and hire a marketing company to go out and market broccoli. They would also go out and hire lobbyists, because what they want to lower that cost is to address the policies and the equities of subsidies, or tax dollars that are going to make foods that are unhealthy cheap, and foods that we would consider fruits and vegetables that the government considers specialty crops more expensive. And so unless we address the underlying policies, we're really kind of left with what we have right now, and that is big dollars that are lobbying Congress to have policies that sort of work for big food and not for people.
Andrea, on your part, you deal not a lot with big ag, but with small ag. You've done a lot of work around the state of North Carolina to help bring local farms and farmers' work to your table. Can you talk a little bit about what difficulties you face in doing that and how you've worked to build networks of local farmers to benefit yourself?
Sure. I mean, North Carolina is an agriculture state, but there's about 250 small farms within a 10-minute drive of my restaurant, 15-minute drive of my restaurant, and a lot of them are tiny, and a lot of them are increasingly medium-sized. And I think, like when I think about kind of what the function of the restaurant in my community has been, and many other people who have, restaurants that are active in kind of local food in my community, it reminds me of that line, that great Roger Ebert line, that like when movies are great, they act as like an empathy machine. There's a lot of things that are invisible in our food system, and you can see them and you can find them in restaurants. We have a lot of people who work in our restaurant who who come from Mexico, who haven't seen their kids or their wife or their mother in 10 to 12 years. So we talk a lot about the people that work in our kitchen. People might come in and say, why don't you have chicken right now on the menu? Well, the Slaughterhouse didn't open this week because farmers don't trust the slaughterhouse owner to put chickens on the ground because it's $3.75 to slaughter a chicken. So there's these conversations we can have in the restaurant that help the community kind of see who is making their food and who's responsible for their food and how many hands have been on their food before it's getting even to our restaurant.
Mario, have you seen some of that? A lot of the reporting that went into your book, your latest book, involves farmers, not just in one area, not a Hudson Valley Babo delivery system, but all over the country. Did you see some of this as well in your travels?
Well, what I saw are farmers that pretty much sell most of their products at retail prices and wholesale volume because they're lucky enough to be loved by chefs who create a demand amongst both their customers in the restaurant, but also by sharing that love for those ingredients, the ability for them to charge full price at their green market or farmer's market, which is a really great small part of the business. So all we really got to talk to were people that were loving it, people that were successful and happy about it, and people that were intimately involved in the details of bringing delicious, slightly idiosyncratic products to the market as promoted by a chef who was somehow involved in them. If you get into the farmers' stories, which is where, in fact, the juice of the book lies, you find out that there's different motivations. These are farmers that are interested because they were sick and tired of being advertising people, or their seventh-generation family who decided they'd give it a shot because it seemed romantic and beautiful at this time, or people who got into it as a secondary thing. They started gardening, and then all of a sudden their farm kind of grew out of business. So what we saw were kind of the shining examples of how farming and the agricultural relationship between farmers, chefs, and consumers of the final product get to live together in a way where everyone's happy. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the discussion today. I think What we're really talking about is what's broken. Mm-hmm. And what I would suggest is that when we look at all the problems that we have in the American farming system, starting with subsidies, ending with products, the largest issue that I can understand is waste. We throw away a lot of food. And the greatest advantage that we have, in my opinion, is the American free market system. If we can somehow create a product and incentivize the people to make it from stuff that no one wants and sell it both to the poor and to the rich because it's been marketed like a McNugget, then we will have something that will eventually fix itself because there will be a product that appeals to almost everybody emotionally, financially, and gastronomically, as well as health-wise. So that's really where we have to kind of drive this boat. We could talk policy all day long. At the end of the day, it's all pork in our country. And if we really want to fix this, we should have 1- and 2-term limits and really talk about revamping the whole thing, not just going in with a Band-Aid or trying to fix it on a small level. Not that there's anything wrong with any approach that anyone has, because it's a conundrum. It's entropy, which is why it's remarkable. And we won't fix anything in 1 year. We can start to fix things in a way that incentivizing with economic incentive is where we're going to fix things.
Is that going to lead to the Cisco broccoli ball, or is that going to lead to the delicious new McNugget?
It's the Colicchio that I'm looking for. It's a lentil sandwich on a broccoli loaf made with chipotle mayonnaise with egg-free custard.
Mm-hmm. Very crisp.
And he can do it.
He can do it. Let us stick with this subject, this divide between the idyll that you describe and the reality of, I've already invoked Cisco, of the Cisco truck. You two are both proponents of local sustainable produce and gear. But Andrea depends on it. This is the business all the way. You guys have businesses that exist beyond the reach of those farms, I would presume. And there are going to be moments when your businesses intersect with that big ag world, yes? How do you balance that?
No, not at all. We're buying, I would say, 95% of our products directly from the farmers that we know. Also, all our meats are antibiotic free. And part of the reason I did that, I opened my mouth on a TV show on Morning Joe, and he asked me a question about what was the biggest problem right now in food production. I said the overuse of antibiotics. I also had MRSA. And beat it, and ended up coming home from the hospital with a PICC line in my chest for 2 months. So I started
from eating your food?
No, I was no from a hospital actually.
Beware.
Yeah, and so no, not at all. No, we don't rely on large producers at all.
Well, we get our broccoli when there's no broccoli when the Northeast is snow covered. We are not kidding anyone. We get our broccoli from somewhere where it's sunny.
Right.
We'll buy stuff that are made by pole farms here as much as we can. But at the end of the day, when you have 8 restaurants in New York City and we serve the kind of volume that we serve, we're looking at getting products outside of what we consider the ideal catch.
Right. And that's what I'm interested in, just in how you calibrate that balance. It's not just ingredients either. I mean, here come cleaning products, here come all kinds of material that help run a business. And balancing your roles as beacons of political thought with the stark reality of running a business or a series of businesses all around the United States must create issues.
There's a lot of tensions there. I mean, I think, 10 years ago, I started this project to try to get, cilantro. We use a tremendous amount of cilantro in the restaurant, grown in a greenhouse in North Carolina. And, it wasn't really economical, but we liked to talk about it, and it was this fun project. We'd go out and see the herbs, that somebody was heating this greenhouse in the winter. And really, it turns out, I'd rather take that money and give somebody, 3 extra weeks for maternity leave, or give someone a raise. And so, there is that tension. And I think when you get to this level of purity, we're victim of our own marketing in some sense, because the farm-to-table movement has been very powerful for chefs in many ways. But we're at this moment of kind of plateau with it, and where can we go from here? I think the image of the chef in a white coat shopping at the farmer's market is holding us back in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I find that farm to table interesting, because I think the most important word in farm to table is two, because it all starts on a farm and it all ends up on a table.
Right.
It's what happens in between. And so that's where I think we need to focus this, and sort of the between the farm and the table.
So let's...
Hold on, Tom.
Yeah.
Oh.
So it goes from the farm, and then it goes to a preposition, and then it goes to another noun, right?
When you were actually looking at those farmers, talking to those farmers, did any of them look like that?
We drove through shit. On the way to the little farm at the other end behind the oak tree.
Thank you.
So beyond the little farm next to the oak tree, there's a guy who's growing cattle, or there's a woman who's raising sheep. This seems to me to be a big issue for you guys, because the government's role in the processing of meat is very different from the processing of cilantro, let's say. And access to slaughterhouses for these small farmers is a big issue. And I wonder if one or all of you could talk a little bit about how that impacts both what you do as chefs and restaurateurs and what it is that we can take from that as consumers.
Yeah. That is the one issue, I think, slaughterhouses, where it's becoming very, very difficult to shop locally. I live in the city, but I have a house out in North Fork, Long Island, and there's a lot of people now raising chickens, raising lamb, cattle. There's no slaughterhouses around, so they've got to ship their animals out to get slaughtered and then bring them back to the farm. It just costs too much money. There is one slaughterhouse in Long Island that's close by, but for some reason, it's only available to prisons. And so you start talking to some of the people out there and trying to figure out how do we get a slaughterhouse? How do you open up that slaughterhouse so people can use it? And it just falls on deaf ears. people don't want a slaughterhouse in their community.
Right.
And so
Well, why, besides death? I mean, there's nasty waste that goes all over the place. I mean, you know, the whole idea.
Yeah, of course.
The cleanliness of a
I
pork
get it.
chop is beautiful, but it's
Right,
not necessarily beautiful from, say, sty to counter.
Yeah. I think that's, you know, the access to slaughterhouses in North Carolina were pretty unusual because a lot of the mom and pop places that we had stayed open because they were grandfathered in and they weren't forced to close when they changed hands. And so, you know, I think there's probably 30 or 35 slaughterhouses that are small, independent, you know, other than the big vertically integrated slaughterhouses. There's lots of access to slaughter.
Which is good. Lots of access
Processing.
to slaughter in North Carolina.
That's our slogan. Come
Yeah.
to our state. There's lots of access to slaughter.
We'll
There
kill
is.
you.
Many layers
We saw
there.
it on Tuesday, too.
Did you hear that? Repeat that one. So we've talked a little bit now about sustainable agriculture. We've talked about the slaughterhouses and meat. When I'm around Tom Colicchio, I always like to talk a little bit about fish. I think the question for consumers, for diners, again and again, is what are we supposed to do about fish? Are we allowed to eat farm salmon? What do we think of tilapia? Is aquaculture good? Is it bad? Is it just, you know, the big fish processors telling us it's bad, or the salmon guy? What are we to make of it? Just schmuck consumers trying to figure out the fishmonger. Help us, chefs.
I'll tell you, there is great aquaculture in the world of oysters right now.
There is
You
indeed.
can support it. It creates a delicious product. It
Cleans the water.
It cleans the water. There's no downside to really good oyster farming.
Except if you're in Maryland now and you're complaining that the crabs are going because there's too many oysters. Did you see this recently?
Yeah, the
Big
baymen are
complaining
the
about the
baymen are
oyster-
There's
complaining.
oyster
salt
farming.
and
Yeah.
there's pepper.
Yeah. This is true.
No, listen. I think.
What about finfish, though? There's a
Yeah,
better-
let's
better
talk about
There,
fin.
there are some clean fish farmers. If anybody read Dan's book, we're in Dan's house, so we'll bring it up. He talks about
Dan Barber.
a clean Dan Barber. Well, yeah, that guy. He talks
say
about
my last
clean
name.
fish farming, and so there can be clean fish farming, but it's a sustainable method of farming, which is very much like sort of what we're talking about.
Yes,
It's how
indeed.
you create a sustainable method. They've actually figured out a way to create a sustainable method around fish farming, so it can work.
But it works. It works. How often is farmed tilapia on the Colicchio home table?
Zero.
Exactly. And how about any other farm fish that you've tasted so far?
Black bass from Virginia.
Good?
Farmed in ocean water on land, so no problem with escapees or pollution.
All right, then.
It's expensive, but it's delicious.
Well,
I
there
think
we have
expensive
one.
is a very good question because at the end of the day, the real answer here is what we're going to create are delicious, sustainable products that are out of the reach of everyone except for restaurants.
That's true.
Restaurant chefs. And the reason that is, and I just came back from Paris where I spent 270 euros at a restaurant for one chicken. Because they have created a culture there where a poulet de Bresse is worth that kind of money in the sick, twisted 3-star Michelin world. That said, a raw chicken like that is $80. And people will spend $80 for something that has a pedigree, a history, and a style, and a method that gets it to them in what they consider to be almost a boutique ingredient thing. And America is ready for this, but America is not ready for this.
That's correct, because in America today, you can go into a big box store and buy a bag of breaded chicken parts for $8.
Or a
and
big
feed-
bag of chickens and thighs, legs and thighs for $7.
Right. So what, I was going to say, what are we to do about this? But I asked you, as leaders in this area, what are you to do about it? How do we reconcile the fact that finfish should cost $1 million, that a breast chicken should cost close to $300, with our pressing need to lead Americans to better proteins, to better meals, to better food?
Well, I mean, I think that's the question, really, you know, and I think that chefs have a big role in realigning flavor and the idea of what tastes good. And I think, you know, we are now in this moment where we're on this quest to find, you know, things that are edible and barely edible. And we talk a lot about bugs, and we talk a lot about bones, and we're talking a lot about things, to eat that are on the edge of edible, but we do a really good job as chefs, like with testicles, but we don't do a really good job with like rump roast. You know, we're not out there trying to demystify a cooking process and help people be more engaged in cooking regular food that's very useful. It might not be the best steak you've ever had in your life, but we exalt this steak or the testicles or whatever we exalt. But there's all this other food that's very useful, going to the waste question,
right.
and we have a role in that.
Right. I think going back to fish for a second, there's a lot of fish that we kind of turn our nose up at. Sea robins, for instance.
Right.
As you probably know, they're actually quite delicious.
They're pretty good.
But yet they're pretty damn ugly, and you'll never see it on the menu. And yet there are fish out there that are quite good that we're not using, we're not utilizing, we're not looking at as a food source for whatever reason. And so that could help bend the cost curve. But again, I'll go back to subsidies. The only reason why fast food is cheap and the fast food hamburger is more expensive than a head of broccoli, or less expensive than a head of broccoli, is because of subsidies. You have $25 billion of subsidies. 85% of that is going for corn, wheat, soy, and cotton. 15% to dairy and meat, 1% to vegetables. So and you're right. And so it's very easy to demonize someone, because Mark talked earlier about poverty. Very easy to demonize someone because they're feeding their kids the wrong types of foods that are causing obesity, foods that aren't healthy. But those are cheap. Right. And so when you have very little dollars, you're going to buy the cheapest food possible. So how do you bend that cost curve? You have to start allocating more money towards healthier foods. And these are tax dollars. These are our dollars that are actually propping up this industry. And so at some point, we have to address the policies and the politics of this. This is why food policy action actually, I think, is starting to become effective. I mentioned in a TED Talk that the second that we actually, we're trying to hold our leaders accountable, our elected politicians accountable with our scorecard.
Well, I
made a comment that the second that we actually, someone loses their job about the way they vote around food or hunger, then we actually have a movement. And that happened on Tuesday. We targeted Stephen Sutherland in Florida, and it was we have very limited funds at this point. We're a new organization. We targeted Stephen Sutherland, and he lost. And this is an election that went very, very red, and he lost. And so people, and the exit polling that we looked at, people, if you ask the right questions, they care about food, they want our leaders to care about food, and it worked.
So let's just go back to the scorecards for a minute, because I think it may be helpful for this crowd for you to describe them, because it's really, politics is a mystery to many Americans. We targeted him. We had limited funds, but we asked the right questions. What does that mean? That could be scary. I'm scary. He could have just been knocking on doors scaring people. But in reality, this scorecard, this very simple, elegant tool, seems to have had an effect. Can you talk about how those grades are, or how it's set up and how the grades
It's no mystery. The NRA does it. I mean, tons of people have scorecards. And this was the first one around food. And so we look at bills as they're coming to the floor to be voted on. We look at co-sponsorships, and we determine whether it's good food policy or bad food policy. We determine whether or not we're going to score it. We let Congress know that we may score it, and depending on how you vote, you end up with a score. And it's fairly simple. We just published our third scorecard, and it's starting to piss people off on both sides of the aisle. And it's a very simple tool, and the good thing for the consumer is you can go to the site and very quickly look at these various bills and break it down so it's very simple to understand, and then you can see how your representatives are voting on these issues. And if you don't like it, let them know. And so it's a pretty simple tool. And as far because we're a C4, we can get involved in campaigns, directly in campaigns. And we decided that Steve Sutherland, number one, was vulnerable, and number two, was the worst guy around hunger. This is the guy who wanted to cut $39 billion out of the SNAP program. This is the guy that wanted people to receive benefits that they had to work. One of the guys well, it was his bill that you had to work for SNAP benefits. When you're talking about 16 million children, 13 million seniors that are receiving benefits as well, and you're talking about unemployment that is very high and people can't find jobs. Work training programs consist of a room with a computer terminal that you sort of find a fast food job or something. And so this is terrible. And so we decided to target him, and in a tough election, Gwen Graham is now the House member of Congress from Florida too.
And you're a demon in the pages of the Journal. Mario?
And the whiff of sweetness in an otherwise very stinky election, in my opinion. But to talk about that and to hold the politicians accountable is one thing. To hold the populace accountable is another thing. And there are two ways to go at this, and one of them is the information that we can easily share through the New York Times
I'm not suggesting
website.
mutually exclusive.
No, I know, and I know that. But I would say that my fastest and easiest way to help kind of get this ball rolling is, as opposed to knowing that you're out there on the front lines of the ugly world inside the belt, I'm outside more likely trying to convince people not to go to Popeyes, but instead buy wings at a very good price at their big box store and cook them at their house. And at the end, I would say that a more palatable, to use a slight pun, solution for this problem is going to be in the education of the basic consumer to the availability of relatively good products, provided they skip the fast food aisle and skip the processed carbohydrate aisle and go instead to the vegetables and the protein themselves and cook it their way. So it's got to go both ways, right? I mean, I'm with you on your battle against the skanky scum that run the country, but there's a whole mess of other people that don't necessarily even hear that guy. Like, there will be a lot of people that don't even know that guy exists,
Of course.
and that he's constantly in our way of trying to create something good.
Right, of course. But again, how do you make fruits and vegetables more affordable? Because when we're talking about sustainability, if 1/6 of the population cannot afford it, it is not sustainable.
Correct. But if you can make pretty good chicken, I'm like Bill Clinton trying to make you guys friends again.
Oh, we're friends.
no, we're definitely friends.
I know they're friends. So we started out here. I think it was Tom who mentioned that this food movement that I brought up has something in common with other policy movements that we've seen in the United States. You invoked the civil rights movement. I wonder if I asked each one of you to put a marker in where we are in that journey, what you would say. Are we 10% of the way? Are we 20, 30, 70% of the way?
To success.
To success, however it is we choose to decide.
I don't think we're on that bridge in Selma yet, I'll tell you that much.
All right, then.
No, I don't think we're there yet. I think we're in the beginning. I mean, part of the problem, and maybe eventually there'll be a bona fide leader. There are a lot of people who are in this room at this conference who are leading the charge. But I think at some point we need to create more of a center of gravity around this to really.
So you're in the single percentages. We're
maybe
getting up on
10%. We're talking about it, and maybe it can happen quickly. Maybe it'll happen quickly, more quickly than we think. I mean, I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. Hopefully, it'll happen in their lifetime. I don't know what's going to happen in mine.
Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, I think the 10% idea is there for me. Like, I've lived in North Carolina for 20 years, and I think there's as much local food available at the co-op now as there was then. It's like that needle hasn't really changed at all. But we all talk about food all the time, but I think we really still have two food systems. And I think, the chef at the farmer's market is the symbol of that 1%, 2%, 3%, 5% of sales maybe, direct from a grower to somebody who's going to prepare that food. And that's what we need to radically change very quickly if we're going to make this thing happen fast.
So you're a 10%er as well.
Yeah.
I'm far more optimistic than
I knew you would be, Mario.
I would say just the fact that we're having a conference like this, just the fact that on a daily TV show on the Food Network, people are talking about healthy and sustainability and using grains and getting rid of carbohydrates that are super processed. Just the fact that people are thinking about it, whereas 30 years ago it was only chefs, we're a long ways down the path. We're nowhere near the end, but I think the last 10% will be, it's like trying to lose 20 pounds. Yeah, you lose 15 and then you try to lose 5 and it's just not happening. The movement is on the path. And through the likelihood and thoughtfulness of the people here to continue to promulgate that message, it's going to keep going. But we're not near the end, but we're somewhere in the middle that's much better than 1% or 5%. I mean, the fully funded hunger relief in America, when's that going to happen? I don't know. But the awareness that you can be a part of the project is where we really want to go. And the final full end, where we arrive at whatever people think of as a socialist state, where in the richest country of all time, in the richest century of all time, we still have hungry people, is just squandering natural resources. Sure. It's the most pathetic and short-minded ideology to send kids home from school hungry to try to study because they need to be smart.
To send them to school hungry.
Right, well, the whole thing, their whole day having any hunger in it at all. There should be 3 free meals at school, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, at all schools. And that should be part of our policy that we should be really striving for.
You're back to
because
policy.
You're investing.
You're back to
policy. No, I know, I'm
policy.
not saying that. I'm just saying, that's when we're at 100%.
So look at this. So let's
I'm not against policy.
Let's actually bring the two
together. I'm just against politicians.
Let's bring the two together. You know what, though? It's all we have.
Politicians?
No,
There's only
this
like
is our
800
system.
of them.
This is our
There's
system.
200 and some odd million people here.
But okay, so let's look at this. We talked about getting farmers to sort of maybe farm with a better system, but we need young farmers to start farming. We established that earlier. So how do you create a market for that? So let's just say school lunch. You brought it up. If we mandate that 30% of school lunch has to be local and organic, that creates a huge market.
Incentive.
It's a huge market. And it may sound like the free market, but there really is no free market. There's people in this market that are juicing this market from beginning to
soil
end.
to.
And so listen, again, I'll go back to we gotta focus on the grassroots, and we all do that. We also need to look at this from the top down as well. And we have to make Congress listen. We have to make our politicians listen to us. Because if we don't, who's gonna listen?
Andrea, take us home. What do you got?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think, it really comes down to income inequality. I mean, really. And I think that, for everyone in this room probably understands that it's very hard to make money in a restaurant, and that buying local and buying good food in a restaurant is not necessarily an incredibly profitable thing, but it's something that we all do and that it's incredibly rewarding. But what we're serving to our customers is not what most people can eat. And I think that the work of talking about this has to account for the idea that cheap food plays a very big role in what our economic system has become in terms of stagnated wages and income inequality. And that is not a really uplifting note to end on, but it's the reality of what we're up against, and that's where we are.
Well, you're speaking truth. I had hoped for something light and airy, but the reality intruded. And the reality is that for all of our talk of the delicious and for all of our talk of policy change, there's a long way to go in this country. You've shown us that today. You have also given us some glimpses into possibility for the future that I hope everyone at this conference will take back to their place of work and put into action. I thank the three of you for joining us on stage, and I thank all of you.